He's been a real estate mogul, a reality TV star, and of course, the 45th president of the United States. But the real question is, how did Donald become Trump? We're going to trace the path that created one of the most famous and, let's face it, controversial figures in modern history. To really get Donald Trump, you have to start right here, with this idea. It's a philosophy he learned as a kid. You do whatever you have to do, you say whatever you have to say, but you win. This single-minded focus, well, it's been the engine driving his entire life. So, yeah, how did the son of a developer from the outer boroughs become a global brand and a political force that, really, we've never seen before? Well, our story starts at the very beginning. All right, Act 1, and you can't tell this story without talking about the single biggest influence on Donald Trump's life, his father. This first part is all about those early years and the lessons that would end up defining his entire career. Fred Trump was everything to his son. He made an absolute fortune building affordable housing, and he was an obsessively hard worker. He'd take young Donald to construction sites to teach him the business from the ground up. But, the most important lesson he passed on wasn't about bricks and mortar. It was about having a ruthless killer instinct. These were basically the house rules. The advice to be a killer, that was direct. Other lessons like fight for recognition and stir things up, that came from watching other people get walked all over. And after his family fought a housing discrimination lawsuit, he learned a big one: never admit you're wrong. But above all, the number one rule was never, ever be made a sucker. This became his playbook for life. So, armed with those lessons from his dad, Trump set his sights across the river on the biggest prize of all, Manhattan. He wasn't content with his father's empire. No, he wanted the epicenter of wealth, prestige, and, most importantly, attention. And this was his grand entrance, Trump Tower. Look, it wasn't just a building. With all that shimmering golds, the marble, the waterfalls, it was a 68-story temple to opulence, to status, and really, to himself. And he planted it right on Fifth Avenue for the whole world to see.
Now, while he was building his tower, he was also building his image. Trump became a master of the New York tabloids. He figured out really early that all press is good press. He would feed them stories about his crazy lifestyle, his messy divorces, because, it distracted from some shady business deals and it sold this fantasy. And get this, he even called reporters himself, using fake names like John Barron, just to plant stories about how awesome he was.
And during this time, his biggest rival was New York's mayor, a guy named Ed Koch. And these two were complete opposites. Koch called himself a liberal with sanity, and he absolutely hated Trump for, in his view, turning the city into a playground for the super rich. Trump, on the other hand, saw Koch as a total disaster who was just standing in his way. Their public fights were legendary. It was like two men battling for the soul of New York City. So if the 1980s were the boom, the 1990s were the crash. Trump's entire empire, which was built on a mountain of debt and brand name, was about to face its biggest test ever. And it led to one of the most famous comebacks in business history. I mean, this quote really captures the peak of his 1980s fame. He wasn't just a developer anymore. He was a full-blown celebrity, an icon of the American dream on steroids. But that dream was about to turn into a nightmare. By the early 90s, Trump was drowning. He had over $3 billion in business debt, and he personally owed a staggering $900 million. Let that sink in. He was forced to sell his yacht, his airline, his casinos were filing for bankruptcy. He was at absolute rock bottom. But this was the turning point. He realized he couldn't just be the biggest developer anymore. That game was over. He had to become something else. He had to become a brand. The comeback story itself became his new product. So his new strategy was simple: license the name. First up, the Trump Shuttle, a luxury airline that even had gold-plated sinks. It failed pretty quickly, but you know what? The failures didn't really matter. Then there was Trump, the game, selling the fantasy of his business genius to families all across America. There was even Trump vodka, which is pretty ironic for a guy who famously doesn't drink a drop of alcohol. And yep, Trump steaks. The point wasn't whether the product was a success. The point was brand saturation. The Trump name was becoming a symbol of luxury, whether it was real or just imagined. But the ultimate brand revival, the real game changer, came in 2004, The Apprentice. It beamed him into millions of homes, week after week. It totally rejuvenated his image for a whole new generation, cementing this persona as the ultimate no-nonsense boss, whose most famous line was, of course, "You're fired." So that brand revival really set the stage for his final act. After decades of just flirting with politics, Trump was ready to take his performance to the biggest stage in the world, the race for the White House.
His political ambitions really took off in 2011 when he started pushing the birther conspiracy theory, which shot him to the top of some early polls. Then came that famous escalator ride in 2015, where he officially announced he was running. And against all odds, he just bulldozed through the Republican primaries. One source called it a hostile takeover of the party.
And then, the impossible happened. The man that very few people believed would even run, let alone win, did exactly that. In what was truly one of the greatest political upsets in American history, Donald Trump became the 45th president of the United States. Which brings us right back to the beginning, doesn't it? Why did he do it? Maybe it was to stick it to his critics, the media, the establishment. But maybe, just maybe, it all comes back to that very first lesson from his father. After all, what better way to prove to the world and to his dad that he really was a killer?